Martin Scorsese grew up as an Italian-American Catholic in New York City, in a neighborhood called Little Italy. Growing up, Scorsese initially dreamed of being a priest, and he even attended seminary schools as a teenager. But a year after he enrolled, he was kicked out for roughhousing and frequent tardiness. This departure from seminary school, from the path of righteousness and glory, led him tumbling down the beaten path of artistry and storytelling, where he has used his personal experiences with divinity and disgrace to become one of the most prolific filmmakers to have ever lived since the art form's conception. Many viewers and critics don't really associate Scorsese's films with religion, as they often contain profane and vain characters, storylines, and images. From Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street to Henry Hill in Goodfellas, Scorsese's subject matter runs thick with extravagant displays of evil and violence, with broken people and homes, and with greed and dishonesty. While most of Scorsese's films are not directly or overtly religious, they are irrevocably entangled with the topic of religion. Religious themes, symbols, and messages run throughout almost all of them, repeatedly highlighting the stark, often violent juxtaposition between the divine and the profane, and implicitly posing to his audience opaque and complex questions about morality, divinity, violence, sin, and redemption. From this perspective, religion serves as the distinct and unifying thread that not only connects Scorsese's work to each other, but also connects them to the director himself, reflecting back at the audience his own spiritual journey and wrestling with innumerable and unanswerable religious questions across the course of decades. The theme of religion across Scorsese's filmography manifests through three primary avenues: characters, symbols, and cinematic tactics. Though these devices carry weight and meaning within the setting and context of their respective films, analyzing them across films further illuminates their meaning, significance, and Scorsese's intent. Across his filmography, many of Scorsese's lead characters face a similar internal conflict, in which the sacred and moral religious ideals they hold find themselves in constant and unnerving conflict with the imperfect, profane, and often sinful realities of their own beings and the material worlds in which they inhabit. The audience watches as these characters not only grapple with their own irrevocable juxtaposition, but also watch as the characters themselves reflect on their morality and often seek redemption. Scorsese's overarching point is that religion and its divine conceptions do not and cannot exist separately from humanity and the profane realities of our imperfect world. The internal, often spiritual conflicts of Scorsese's characters also manifest externally through the abundant and recurring religious symbols and iconography that adorn his cinematic worlds. While by no means comprehensive, I'll explore a variety of recurring symbols that populate many of Scorsese's films, from crucifixes to paintings to other ceremonial iconography. Scorsese's 1988 film The Last Temptation of Christ brings the topic of religion to the forefront. The film, based on Greek writer Nikos Kazantzakis' 1955 novel of the same name, features Jesus as the main character and his internal conflict as the plot.
Can't he see what's inside of me? All my sins.
We all sin.
Not my sins. I'm a liar, a hypocrite. I'm afraid of everything. I don't ever tell the truth. I don't have the courage. When I see a woman, I blush and look away. I want her, but I don't take her for God, and that makes me proud. And then my pride ruins Magdalene. I don't steal, I don't fight, I don't kill, not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid. I want to rebel against you, against everything, against God, but I'm afraid. You want to know who my mother and father are? You want to know who my God is? Fear. You look inside me and that's all you'll find.
In The Last Temptation, Scorsese portrays Jesus as being in a deep and relentless conflict with his own divinity. While Jesus in The Last Temptation does have and display divine supernatural powers, he is and often appears in many ways earthly and human, experiencing the same physical and psychological feelings as mortals. In the film's most controversial scene, Jesus, nailed to the cross, dreams of an alternate life with Mary Magdalene and fantasizes about profane human topics such as sex. As the film comes to a close, a brief flicker of film break serves as Scorsese's reminder to his audience that the film is just that, a film, with meaning not to be taken literally but rather metaphorically. That subtle reminder, though, did little to stop the backlash. The Last Temptation's unholy and humanistic portrayal of Jesus incited tremendous backlash and protest from Christians across the United States and really the world, even before the film was released as well. In the face of this impassioned criticism, Scorsese stood firm, and even after the Catholic Church banned the film, he remained committed to releasing it on time and across the world, or at least to as many countries as he could. When asked by a studio executive, why he wanted to make The Last Temptation so badly and if it was really worth it, Scorsese responded that he was doing it to, quote, know Jesus better. Scorsese's exploration of his own religion didn't end with Last Temptation. In his own words, quote, the journey is much more involved, it's just not finished. Clearly, to Scorsese, The Last Temptation and the religious ideas that it explores transcend the cinema and serve as a deeply personal exploration of faith. The Last Temptation is also bound to some of Scorsese's more recent works quite physically. In 1988, shortly after watching the film, an Episcopalian bishop gave Scorsese a copy of Shusaku Endo's book Silence, and it was this interaction that served as the initial catalyst for Scorsese's 2016 film Silence, which he, of course, wrestled with for over 2 decades prior to finally completing it. In making Silence, Scorsese was, in his own words, quote, looking for the core of faith. In the director's cut of The Last Temptation, which was released a few years later, Scorsese reflected on the film and its effectuality in communicating the messages and meaning he had intended. He says, quote, in this particular film, by directing this picture, dealing with the iconography head-on and dealing with themes head-on may not have been as successful as dealing with those themes in Mean Streets and Raging Bull, where time places it in a different context, but it's still the same theme. Raging Bull, Scorsese's acclaimed 1980 film, tells the story of Jake LaMotta, a professional boxing champion, and his battles in and out of the ring. Just as Jake is reaching the pinnacle of his fighting career, his domestic life at home is crumbling under the weight of his own self-destruction as he ostracizes his brother Joey and physically abuses his wife Vicky. Although religion or Christianity are never overtly and explicitly mentioned in the film, that is, spoken, it is, at its core, a spiritual and religious film. Christian iconography and symbolism populate almost every corner of Jake's world, whether in the form of the cross on his necklace, the painting adorning his bedroom, or in the practices and symbolism in the ring. And if that's not enough, the ending of the film itself is marked by scripture directly from the Bible, which relates to the film's key theme of redemption. Throughout the film, Jake searches for redemption and atonement in the only way that he knows how, violence. But in this case, the violence is not inflicted on his opponents in the ring or his family at home, but himself. Nowhere is this more clear than during LaMotta's long-awaited match against his bitter boxing rival, Sugar Ray Robinson. During the fight, in the middle of it, LaMotta just gives up. He lowers his arms and stretches them out against the ring and subjects himself to an absolute flurry of violent and just brutal punches from Robinson. Publications in the real world, which of course is the real world story, would come to refer to this moment in 1951 as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. In this moment, Jake subjects himself to brutal physical abuse in an attempt to be sort of atoned or redeemed for the violence and associated sin that he inflicted upon Joey and Vicky and the rest of his family. In crafting this scene, Scorsese makes this clear by leveraging religious iconography and the medium of film to make this spiritual search for atonement apparent. To give a few examples of symbolism within this kind of culminating scene, for one, as Jake stands there with his arms stretched out on the ring side and the ropes, his body sort of forms a makeshift crucifix resembling that back home in his bedroom at his house. And that's the symbol. The crucifix is recurrent throughout a variety of Scorsese films, if not almost all of them. Additionally, heat waves and smoke undulate up onto the ring and kind of give the impression of a hellish, sinful atmosphere. And this was actually created by a fire that Scorsese himself lit beneath the ring to give it this impression. As LaMotta endures the barrage of violent punches from Robinson, Scorsese intercuts to his family members as they watch the fight. First to Vicky, who is shielding herself in horror right beside the ring, but then to Joey, who's sitting alone on his couch at home watching Jake from his TV. Through these cuts, Scorsese gives the viewer the impression that the three are in some sort of dialogue, and that this fight is not just about Jake or what's happening in the ring, but also about Vicky and Joey, and serves as a way to show Jake's acknowledgement of his wrongdoing, and that what he is doing in this very moment is an attempt to atone for that. LaMotta's search for redemption does not end with this gruesome, punishing fight in the ring with Robinson. It reemerges later in the film, exhibited primarily in one final, culminating moment and act of violence. LaMotta, now older and far from his prime, finds himself in prison, confined to the cold cement walls of his cell. A sliver of light shines through the steel bars, like through that of the panes on a cathedral, and illuminates LaMotta's deprived and beaten down face. LaMotta turns to the wall next to him and throws his fists and face into the cement, screaming in pain, vanquish, and frustration as he seeks the redemptive, self-inflicted violence that he received so many years ago when he was in the ring. In the moments that follow and ultimately conclude the film, we see Jake out of prison, but a broken and muted shell of his former, imperfect, violent, and angry self. But admittedly, one that is able to find redemption and make some sort of peace with the feelings of self-doubt and internal constant anger that plagued him, and his ability to love those that he wanted to, like his brother Joey. In one of the final scenes, we see Jake track down Joey outside of a convenience store and give him a hug and tell him he loves him. Joey, apprehensive of the man who caused him and his family so much pain, is uncomfortable and uneasy in this interaction. But Jake, on the other hand, is smiling, affectionate, and far removed from the violence and sin of his past. In fact, Jake, in many ways, is able to find solace in this interaction. Following a shot of Jake looking at himself in the mirror as he does some boxing moves to kind of call back to his former self, the film cuts to black and shows on the screen a biblical quote. The central question that Scorsese poses through this narrative is Jake worthy of redemption? Who is worthy of redemption? In an interview in which he reflected upon Raging Bull, Scorsese himself said that, quote, somehow he seems, as in Jake, to come to some sort of peace with himself. He seems to forgive himself, and maybe that's where we have to begin. Do they deserve mercy too? And if they've harmed so many people, well, in Christian ideas they do, but how do you do that? I find it hard. We all do. But this is where Christ is pushing us to see. Maddening, but it's challenging, and it's the right way, I think. Scorsese's religious questions and commentaries are not confined to Raging Bull or The Last Temptation of Christ. These films merely reflect the religious themes and symbols that run throughout his entire filmography. Like Raging Bull, most of these films are not categorically or overtly religious, but many are entangled with religion as a topic as they reflect Scorsese himself and, consequently, his spiritual journey across time. Ultimately, Scorsese's use of religion highlights a recurrent and problematic unconformity between traditional religious ideals of morality, divinity, devotion, and redemption, and the material realities of the human world that he his characters, and by extension his viewers, find ourselves living within. Through films like The Last Temptation, Raging Bull, Mean Streets, and etc., Scorsese suggests that we cannot view our inherently imperfect and problematic human lives through the stagnant ideological prism of religions, and, in his case, Christianity. Though, with that being said, these points are inherently subliminal, and Scorsese, across his whole filmography, very rarely, saliently and directly argues his perspective or opinion on religion. He simply and subliminally poses to his viewer the very questions that he himself is wrestling with.